What you are about to hear is a story that will chill you to the bone, a tale of a love so deep it turned to bitter poison. It's a story about a man who had everything, a billion-dollar empire, a name that commanded respect, and a wife who adored him. But on one rain-lashed night, he committed an act so cruel, so heartless, that it would defy all belief. He threw his pregnant wife out into the raging storm. But what he didn't know was that fate was watching, and in the seconds that followed, a brutal and swift karma was about to turn his gilded world into a living nightmare. The rain fell in relentless silver sheets against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment. Each drop that splattered against the reinforced glass seemed to mock Isabella, a tiny, insignificant percussion in the grand symphony of her silent suffering. From her vantage point, 30 stories above the glistening, rain-slicked streets of New York City, the world below was a blur of hazy lights and hurried movements. It was a world she was no longer a part of, a world that had become as alien to her as the man standing across the vast, opulent living room. That man was her husband, Julian Croft. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a real estate mogul whose name was whispered in awe in boardrooms and etched in gold on the city's most prestigious buildings. The Croft Tower, a magnificent spiraling edifice of steel and glass that pierced the clouds, was his monument to his own ambition. He was handsome, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her parents' car, and possessed a charisma that could charm the most hardened of investors. But to Isabella, in the suffocating intimacy of their gilded cage, he was a stranger, a cold, calculating enigma whose love had become a distant, painful memory. "I don't understand, Julian." Isabella's voice was barely a whisper, a fragile thread of sound in the cavernous room. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly, a gesture that had become second nature over the past 7 months. The child within her, a son they had dreamed of, was the last vestige of the love she thought they had shared. "Why are you doing this?" Julian, who had been staring out at the storm with an unnerving stillness, finally turned. His eyes, the color of polished steel, held no warmth, no flicker of the affection he had once showered upon her. They were the eyes of a businessman, appraising a failed investment. "Doing what, Isabella?" he asked, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. "Securing my legacy. Protecting my assets, ensuring that the Croft name remains untarnished." "Untarnished." She repeated the word, a bitter taste in her mouth. "What are you talking about?" "This is our child, Julian, your son." A humorless smile touched his lips, a fleeting, cruel expression that did not reach his eyes. "Our child," he echoed, taking a deliberate step towards her. The scent of his expensive cologne, a fragrance she had once found intoxicating, now seemed cloying, suffocating. "That's where you're mistaken, my dear. I have my doubts, serious doubts." Isabella's heart constricted in her chest, a physical pain that stole her breath. "Doubts? What doubts? I have never been with anyone but you, Julian. You know that." "Do I?" He was closer now, his towering presence casting a long, menacing shadow over her. "You were a simple girl from a simple family, Isabella. A scholarship student with stars in her eyes. It was all very charming. But let's be honest, the allure of the Croft fortune is a powerful aphrodisiac. How can I be sure this child is mine? How can I be sure you didn't diversify your portfolio, so to speak?" The accusation, so vile, so utterly baseless, struck her with the force of a physical blow. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. "How can you say that to me?" she sobbed, her voice breaking. "After everything we've been through, after all the love I've given you." "Love," he scoffed, the sound echoing the cold indifference of the storm outside. "You call this love? This cloying, suffocating neediness. You've become a liability, Isabella, a distraction, and I have no room for liabilities in my life." He reached out, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to comfort her. Instead, his hand closed around her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, almost brutal. He began to pull her towards the grand, ornate doors of the penthouse. "What are you doing?" she cried, struggling against his hold. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. "Julian, please, you're hurting me." "I'm cleansing my life," he said, his voice as cold and hard as the marble floor beneath their feet. "I'm excising the rot before it spreads. The prenuptial agreement you so foolishly signed without reading the fine print is quite clear, Isabella. In the event of infidelity, you leave with nothing. And since I have reason to believe you have been unfaithful, well, you can connect the dots." "But I haven't been unfaithful," she shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. "This is insane. You have no proof." "I don't need proof," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'm Julian Croft. My belief is proof enough." He reached the door, and with a flick of his wrist unlocked it. The wind howled through the opening, carrying with it the cold, biting rain. The sounds of the city, a cacophony of sirens and blaring horns, rushed in a stark contrast to the deathly silence of the apartment. "Get out," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Julian." "No," she pleaded, her nails digging into his arm. "Please think about the baby. Our son. It's pouring. I have nowhere to go." "That is no longer my concern," he said, and with a shove, he pushed her out into the hallway. She stumbled, her swollen belly making her clumsy, and fell to her knees on the cold, hard floor. The door to the penthouse, her home, the place where she had dreamed of raising her child, clicked shut with an air of finality that echoed the shutting of a tomb. For a long moment, Isabella could only kneel there, the cold of the marble seeping into her clothes, the sound of her own ragged sobs lost in the roar of the storm. The man she had loved, the man she had married, had just thrown her out like a piece of trash, pregnant, penniless, and alone in the heart of a merciless city. Just as the first wave of despair threatened to consume her, she heard a sound from within the apartment. It was not the sound of Julian's footsteps or the clinking of a glass as he poured himself a celebratory drink. It was a sound that made the hair on her arms stand on end. A loud, guttural cry of pain. It was Julian's voice, but it was a sound she had never heard him make before, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It was followed by a heavy thud, the sound of a large body hitting the floor. Then silence. A silence that was somehow more terrifying than the storm raging outside. For a heart-stopping second, Isabella was frozen. Should she bang on the door, scream for help? Or should she run, flee from the man who had just shattered her life? But then a new sound reached her ears, a faint, almost imperceptible beeping. It was coming from inside the penthouse, a rhythmic, insistent beeping that was getting faster and faster. And with a dawning, chilling horror, Isabella realized what it was. It was the sound of Julian's personal panic alarm, a state-of-the-art device connected directly to his private security team and the emergency services. It was an alarm that Julian, a man who prided himself on his invincibility, would only activate in the most dire of circumstances. Seconds later, the private elevator at the end of the hallway dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal two large, grim-faced men in dark suits, their hands hovering over the holsters on their belts. They were Julian's personal bodyguards, men she had seen 100 times but had never spoken to. They saw her a crumpled, sobbing figure on the floor, and their expressions hardened. But their attention was immediately drawn to the silent, imposing door of the penthouse. They exchanged a look, a silent communication that spoke of years of training and shared experience. One of them a mountain of a man with a shaved head, and a scar that snaked across his cheek spoke into a device on his wrist. "Mr. Croft is not responding. We have a possible security breach and medical emergency at the penthouse. Advise all units to proceed with caution." Then they turned their attention back to Isabella. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice a low rumble, "you need to come with us." Isabella. Her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear, could only stare at them, her tear-filled eyes wide with a question she could not articulate. What was happening? What had happened to Julian in the seconds after he had thrown her out? As the bodyguards helped her to her feet, her gaze fell upon the golden nameplate on the penthouse door. Croft. The letters seemed to mock her, a symbol of a life that was now a cruel, distant dream. But as she was led away, a single chilling thought cut through her grief and confusion. Julian. The man who believed he was untouchable. The man who had just condemned her to a life of destitution had been struck down. And it had happened just seconds after he had committed his most heartless act. It was a coincidence. It had to be. But as the wail of sirens grew louder, echoing through the concrete canyons of the city, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something more than a mere coincidence. She had witnessed the swift, brutal hand of fate. She had witnessed karma, and it was a karma that was only just beginning to unfold. The emergency room of Lenox Hill Hospital was a chaotic ballet of controlled panic. Doctors and nurses moved with a practiced urgency, their voices a low, steady murmur amidst the beeps and whirs of medical equipment. Isabella sat on a cold plastic chair in a small private waiting room, a courtesy afforded to her, not out of compassion, but because of the name of the man who had been rushed here in a whirlwind of paramedics and security personnel. Julian Croft. A coarse grey blanket was draped around her shoulders, a poor substitute for the warmth of her home, the warmth of the life that had been so cruelly snatched away from her. She was still in the designer dress she had worn for what was supposed to be a quiet dinner at home, a dinner that had devolved into a nightmare. The silk was now damp and wrinkled, a pathetic testament to her fall from grace. The two bodyguards stood sentry outside the door, their stoic presence a constant reminder of the impenetrable wall that had always existed between her and Julian's world. They were his men, loyal to him and the empire he had built. To them she was now an outsider, a potential threat, a loose end to be managed. An hour which felt like an eternity crawled by. Isabella's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. There was the raw, visceral pain of Julian's betrayal, a wound so deep she feared it would never heal. There was the gnawing anxiety for the future of her unborn child, a future that was now a terrifying blank slate. And then there was a flicker of something else, something she was ashamed to admit even to herself, a strange, unsettling sense of vindication. It was a dark, ugly thought, but it was there, a tiny, glowing ember in the ashes of her love. Finally the door opened, and a doctor, a kind-faced woman with weary eyes and a gentle demeanor, stepped in. She introduced herself as Dr. Anya Sharma. "Mrs. Croft." She began, her voice soft. Isabella flinched at the name. It felt like a brand, a mark of ownership that no longer belonged to her. Yes, she stammered. Your husband was brought in with a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Doctor, Sharma said, getting straight to the point. A stroke. It was severe and sudden. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. A stroke. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. We've managed to stabilize him for now, the doctor continued. But he's in a critical condition. He's in a medically induced coma to reduce the swelling in his brain. The next 48 hours will be crucial. A coma. The image of Julian, so vibrant, so full of arrogant life, now lying still and silent in a hospital bed, was almost impossible to conjure. Will he be okay? Isabella asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Sharma's expression was guarded. It's too early to say for certain. The damage to the brain is extensive. Even if he does wake up, there's a high probability of significant long-term effects. Aphasia, which is the inability to speak or understand language. Paralysis. Severe cognitive impairment. The doctor's words painted a grim, terrifying picture. The Julian Croft the world knew, the brilliant, ruthless tycoon, could be gone forever, replaced by a shell of a man trapped within his own mind. Can I see him? Isabella asked, a strange compulsion driving her. She needed to see him, to see for herself the reality of what had happened. Dr. Sharma hesitated. Given the circumstances and your condition, she glanced at Isabella's belly. I'm not sure it's advisable. It could be very distressing. I need to see him, Isabella insisted, a newfound strength in her voice. The doctor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but just for a few minutes. As they walked towards the intensive care unit, the two bodyguards fell into step behind them, their presence a silent, suffocating weight. The ICU was a world of hushed tones and the rhythmic symphony of machines that breathed and pulsed for the people they were keeping alive. Julian was in a private room, a glass-enclosed space filled with an array of monitors and IV drips. And there he was, her husband. The man who had just a few hours ago looked at her with such contempt, such cold indifference. He looked small in the large hospital bed, his powerful frame diminished by the tangle of wires and tubes that connected him to the machines. His face, usually so animated, so full of life and arrogance, was slack and pale. A ventilator breathed for him, the rhythmic hiss of the machine, a stark reminder of his fragility. Isabella stood at the foot of the bed, her hand resting on the cool metal railing. A wave of emotions, so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her, washed over her. There was pity, a deep, aching pity for the man who had been so cruelly struck down in the prime of his life. There was fear, a chilling fear of the unknown, of the future that lay before them both. But as she looked at his still silent form, another feeling began to surface. A feeling that was both terrifying and liberating. It was a sense of release. The man who had held her captive in a gilded cage, the man who had wielded his power and wealth like a weapon, was now powerless. The man who had tried to silence her, to erase her from his life, was now the one who was silenced. She thought of the irony, the cruel, poetic justice of it all. He had accused her of being a liability, a threat to his legacy. And now, in a single devastating moment, he had become the biggest liability of all. His empire, the thing he had prized above all else, was now vulnerable, exposed. Just then a man in a sharp, expensive suit, his face etched with worry, rushed into the room. He was Marcus Thorne, Julian's lawyer, and closest confidant, a man who was as cold and calculating as Julian himself. He barely glanced at Isabella, his eyes fixed on Julian's still form. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory, as if Dr. Sharma were personally responsible for the catastrophe. "A massive stroke," Dr. Sharma replied calmly. Marcus swore under his breath, his carefully constructed composure cracking for a fraction of a second. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, his mind already racing, calculating the damage, the implications for the Croft empire. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he muttered to himself. "The Nakatomi deal. This is a disaster." He finally turned his attention to Isabella, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "I'm his wife," Isabella said, her voice quiet but firm. Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not for much longer, from what I understand. Julian told me his intentions. The divorce papers are already drawn up." "He's in a coma," Isabella said, her voice rising. "Have you no decency?" "Decency is a luxury we can't afford right now," Marcus retorted, his voice low and menacing. "What we need is damage control, and you, my dear, are a complication we don't need." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me give you a piece of friendly advice. You have no claim to the Croft fortune. The prenup is ironclad. Take whatever settlement Julian was offering you and disappear. Quietly. It will be better for everyone, especially for you and your child." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. He was trying to intimidate her, to scare her into submission, just as Julian had. But something inside Isabella had shifted. The fear that had paralyzed her just a few hours ago was being replaced by a slow, burning anger, a righteous fury that she had suppressed for far too long. She looked from Marcus's smug, arrogant face to the still, silent form of her husband in the bed. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her kindness for weakness, her love for naivety. They had thought they could discard her like a broken toy. They were wrong. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a newfound power that surprised even herself. "I am Julian Croft's wife, and this," she said, her hand once again resting on her swollen belly, "is his son, his heir." Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. "You have no idea what you're up against," he hissed. "No," Isabella replied, a strange, calm smile touching her lips. "I think for the first time I do." As she turned to leave the room, she cast one last look at Julian. The man who had thrown her out into the rain, the man who had tried to strip her of everything, was now at her mercy. And in the cold, sterile environment of the ICU, amidst the beeping and whirring of the machines that kept him alive, a new battle was just beginning. It was a battle for control, a battle for legacy, a battle for the future of the Croft Empire. And Isabella, the discarded wife, was about to become its most unlikely and formidable warrior. The days that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, legal jargon, and the constant unnerving presence of men in dark suits. Julian remained in his coma, a silent, breathing monument to his own hubris. The world he had so meticulously built, the empire that had been his life's obsession, was now in a state of suspended animation, waiting for its king to awaken, or for a new ruler to ascend the throne. and in a move that sent shockwaves through the hallowed halls of Croft Enterprises, Isabella, the woman they had all dismissed as a pretty, naive socialite, made her first move, armed with a power of attorney. She had, in a moment of foresight she couldn't quite explain, insisted Julian sign a year ago, during a particularly nasty bout of influenza. She walked into the emergency board meeting that Marcus Thorne had so desperately tried to postpone. The boardroom, located on the top floor of the Croft Tower, was a temple of corporate power. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members, a collection of old-money patriarchs and ruthless corporate raiders who had been hand-picked by Julian for their loyalty and their killer instincts. They were the sharks of the financial world, and they could smell blood in the water. When Isabella walked in, a stunned silence fell over the room. She was not the weeping, hysterical woman they had expected. She was dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face pale but resolute. Her pregnancy, once a symbol of her vulnerability, now seemed to give her an aura of strength, of fierce maternal power. Marcus Thorne, who was standing at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled fury, was the first to speak. "Isabella," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is a private meeting. I think you've lost your way." Isabella didn't flinch. She walked calmly to the head of the table, to the chair that had always been Julian's, and placed a leather-bound folder on the polished surface. "On the contrary, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I am exactly where I need to be." She looked at the faces around the table, meeting each of their gazes with a cool, unwavering stare. "As you all know, my husband Julian Croft is currently indisposed, and while we all pray for his speedy recovery, the business of Croft Enterprises cannot grind to a halt." She opened the folder and slid a document across the table towards Marcus. "This," she said, "is a durable power of attorney legally executed by my husband, granting me full authority over his personal and business affairs in the event of his incapacitation. It has been verified by my legal counsel this morning." Marcus snatched the document, his eyes scanning the page with a frantic intensity. The color drained from his face. He knew the document was legitimate. He had been there when Julian had signed it, had dismissed it as a sentimental, meaningless gesture, a fatal mistake. "This is outrageous!" One of the board members, a portly man with a florid face, sputtered. "You're a housewife. What do you know about running a multi-billion-dollar corporation?" Isabella turned her cool gaze on him. "I know that my husband's legacy is at stake," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised them all. "And I know that some of you—" She let her gaze sweep across the room. "See this as an opportunity to carve up his empire for your own personal gain. But let me be very clear. That will not happen on my watch." In the weeks that followed, Isabella proved that she was no mere figurehead. She threw herself into the world of high finance, with a ferocity and an intelligence that no one, least of all Marcus Thorne, had anticipated. She spent her days in the office poring over financial reports, meeting with department heads, and grilling Julian's top executives about every aspect of the business. She spent her nights in her lonely penthouse, the ghost of Julian's betrayal, a constant companion studying business strategies, devouring books on corporate law, and preparing for the battles she knew were to come. She discovered that she had a natural aptitude for the cutthroat world of business, a talent she had never known she possessed. She was a quick study, with a sharp, analytical mind, and an uncanny ability to read people, to see through their bluffs and their sycophantic smiles to the greed and ambition that lay beneath. She also discovered the rot at the heart of Julian's empire. The untarnished legacy he had been so desperate to protect was in reality a house of cards built on a foundation of shady deals, creative accounting, and ruthless tactics that bordered on the illegal. The much-lauded Nakatomi deal, the one Marcus had been so worried about, was a particularly toxic asset, a real estate venture that was hemorrhaging money and was on the verge of collapse. Isabella, against the vociferous objections of Marcus and the other board members, made a bold and audacious decision. She decided to cut their losses and pull out of the Nakatomi deal, a move that would cost the company millions in the short term, but would, she argued, save it from financial ruin in the long run. It was a gamble, a high-stakes poker game, with the future of the company on the line. And it was a move that earned her the grudging respect of some of the more seasoned executives who had long harbored their own doubts about the deal, but had been too afraid to challenge Julian. But her biggest challenge, the one that tested her resolve to its very limits, came from an unexpected quarter. A letter arrived at the penthouse, a simple handwritten letter on cheap lined paper. It was from a woman named Maria Sanchez, a name that meant nothing to Isabella. The letter was a plea for help. Maria's son, a young construction worker named David, had been severely injured in an accident at one of Julian's construction sites. The company had denied all liability, claiming that David had been negligent and had offered the family a paltry, insulting settlement that barely covered his initial medical bills. Isabella, moved by the mother's desperate plea, began to investigate. She discovered a cover-up, a deliberate attempt by the company to hide the fact that the accident had been caused by faulty equipment and a blatant disregard for safety protocols. She found a trail of internal memos, hushed-up reports, and intimidated witnesses. And at the center of it all was Marcus Thorne, who had personally orchestrated the cover-up to protect the company's reputation and its bottom line. The discovery filled Isabella with a cold, righteous anger. This was the true face of the Croft Empire, the ugly, brutal reality behind the glamorous facade. This was the legacy Julian had been so desperate to protect, a legacy built on the broken bodies of innocent people. Armed with this new, damning evidence, Isabella confronted Marcus in his office. She laid out the proof of his deception, the trail of lies and corruption that led directly to his door. Marcus, for the first time since she had known him, looked genuinely afraid. "You can't prove any of this," he blustered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Can't I?" Isabella replied, her voice as cold as ice. "I have sworn affidavits from 2 other workers who witnessed the accident. I have the maintenance records for the faulty equipment. And I have a mother who is willing to testify to tell the world what Croft Enterprises did to her son." She leaned across his desk, her eyes boring into his. "You have 2 choices, Marcus. You can either approve a full and fair compensation package for the Sanchez family, a package that will cover all of David's medical expenses, his lost wages, and his pain and suffering, and you will tender your resignation from this company, effective immediately. Or I can hand this file over to the district attorney's office, and we can let a grand jury decide your fate." Marcus stared at her, his face a mixture of hatred and grudging admiration. He was trapped, and he knew it. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed by the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. He chose to resign. The ousting of Marcus Thorne sent a clear and unequivocal message to the rest of the company. There was a new order at Croft Enterprises. The old days of ruthlessness and corruption were over. A new era of accountability and integrity was about to begin. As Isabella stood in her husband's office, the city lights twinkling below, she felt a sense of triumph, a sense of power she had never known before. She had faced down the sharks, she had cleansed the company of its most toxic elements, and she had begun to forge a new legacy, a legacy she could be proud of. But her victory was bittersweet. She was still alone in the vast, empty penthouse, the silence of her life a constant reminder of the love she had lost. And in the hospital, Julian still slept oblivious to the world that was changing so dramatically around him. One evening as she was leaving the office, her phone rang. It was Dr. Sharma. "Isabella." The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "I think you should come to the hospital. There's been a change." Isabella's heart leaped into her throat. "Is he?" "He's waking up," Dr. Sharma said. "Julian is waking up." The drive to the hospital was the longest of Isabella's life. 1,000 questions, 1,000 fears, 1,000 hopes warred within her. What would she find when she got there? Would he be the same man who had thrown her out into the rain? Would he remember what he had done, or would he be a stranger, a broken man with no memory of his past life? When she arrived at the ICU, she found Dr. Sharma waiting for her. "He's been drifting in and out of consciousness for the past few hours," the doctor explained in a low voice. "He's agitated, confused. That's to be expected. We've reduced the sedatives, but his brain is still healing. It's going to be a long road." Isabella took a deep breath and pushed open the door to Julian's room. The rhythmic hissing of the ventilator was gone. He was breathing on his own. His eyes were open, but they were unfocused, darting around the room with a look of bewildered terror. He saw her, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of recognition of something akin to relief crossed his face. "Bella," he whispered, his voice a hoarse, raspy shadow of its former self. Tears sprang to Isabella's eyes. He knew her. He remembered her. "I'm here, Julian," she said, her voice choked with emotion. She moved closer to the bed, her hand reaching for his. But as her fingers brushed against his expression changed. The flicker of recognition was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. His eyes, the color of cold, hard steel, narrowed into slits. "You!" he snarled the word, a venomous hiss. "What are you doing here?" Isabella recoiled as if she had been struck. "Julian, Get out!" He roared, his voice surprisingly strong. He tried to sit up, his body trembling with a furious energy. "Get away from me, you witch! You did this to me!" Dr. Sharma rushed to his side, trying to calm him. "Mr. Croft, please. You need to relax. You've been very ill." But Julian was beyond reason. His eyes were wild, his face contorted in a mask of rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. "She did this!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the quiet corridors of the ICU. "She poisoned me! She tried to kill me! She wants my money! Get her out of here, security!" 2 nurses rushed into the room, their faces etched with alarm. Dr. Sharma gave Isabella an apologetic, sorrowful look. "I think it's best if you leave," she said gently. "He's not himself. It's the brain injury. It can cause personality changes, paranoia, delusions." Isabella stumbled out of the room, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She had thought that his awakening would be the end of her nightmare, but it was only the beginning of a new, more terrifying one. The man she had once loved, the father of her unborn child, now looked at her with the eyes of a stranger who believed she was his mortal enemy. The days that followed were a living hell. Julian's recovery was slow and arduous. The stroke had left him with significant physical and cognitive impairments. His right side was partially paralyzed, forcing him to rely on a wheelchair. His speech was slurred, his thoughts fragmented. But the one thing that remained terrifyingly intact was his hatred for Isabella. He refused to see her flying into a rage whenever she tried to enter his room. He accused her of all manner of conspiracies, of trying to steal his company, of plotting to have him declared mentally incompetent so she could take control of his fortune. He told anyone who would listen. His doctors, his nurses, the few remaining loyalists from his old guard, that Isabella was a monster, a black widow who had lured him into her web and then tried to destroy him. Isabella was devastated. She had hoped that in time his memory would return, that he would remember the love they had once shared. But as the weeks turned into a month, it became clear that the Julian she had known was gone forever, replaced by this bitter, paranoid shell of a man. And then the unthinkable happened. Julian, with the help of a new, ruthless legal team, filed a lawsuit against her. He was contesting the power of attorney, claiming that he had been coerced into signing it. He was suing for divorce on the grounds of adultery and attempted murder. And in the most cruel and devastating blow of all, he was suing for sole custody of their unborn child, claiming that Isabella was an unfit mother, a danger to her own son. The news hit Isabella like a physical blow. She had fought so hard to protect his legacy, to save his company, to create a better future for their child. And now he was using that very legacy, the power and wealth of the Croft Empire, to destroy her. The media, which had been following the saga of the fallen tycoon with a morbid fascination, went into a frenzy. The headlines were brutal sensationalist. Millionaire's wife in shocking murder plot. Black widows bid for Croft fortune. Pregnant socialites' web of deceit. Isabella became a pariah, a villain in a story that was being written by Julian's high-priced public relations team. She was hounded by paparazzi, her every move scrutinized, her character assassinated in the court of public opinion. The world, it seemed, was eager to believe the worst of her, to see her as a gold-digging shrew who had gotten her just deserts. She felt herself begin to crumble under the weight of it all. The stress was taking its toll on her pregnancy. She had trouble sleeping, her nights filled with nightmares. She lost her appetite, her once healthy glow replaced by a pale, gaunt look. She was alone, completely and utterly alone, in a war she could not possibly win. Julian had the money, the power, the influence. She had nothing but the truth, and the truth she was beginning to realize was a fragile and easily shattered thing. One evening, as she sat in the darkened penthouse, the city lights a mocking reminder of the world that had turned against her, she fell into a deep, despairing sleep. And in that sleep, she had a dream. She dreamed of a small, sun-drenched cottage by the sea, with a garden full of blooming flowers and the sound of waves crashing on the shore. She dreamed of a life of peace and simplicity, a life far away from the gilded cage of New York City and the poison of the Croft name. And in that dream, she was holding her son, a beautiful, healthy baby, with his father's eyes, but her smile. When she woke up, the first rays of dawn were streaming through the windows, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity, a sense of peace. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't fight Julian. She couldn't win a war against a man who was determined to destroy her. But she could save her son. She could give him the life he deserved, a life free from the toxic legacy of his father. She got up and began to pack a small bag. Her hands moved with a newfound purpose, a quiet determination. She took only a few essential items, some clothes, the small amount of cash she had on her, and a faded photograph of her parents. As she was about to leave, her eyes fell on a small velvet box on her nightstand. It was the first gift Julian had ever given her, a simple, elegant pearl necklace. She had cherished it, had seen it as a symbol of his love. With a heavy heart, she opened the box. The pearls gleamed in the morning light, a beautiful, perfect lie. She closed the box and left it on the nightstand. She would take nothing from this life, nothing that belonged to Julian Croft. She walked out of the penthouse, leaving behind the luxury, the power, the pain. She took the service elevator down to the ground floor, a ghost slipping away in the pre-dawn quiet. As she stepped out onto the street, the city was just beginning to stir. The air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the stale, suffocating atmosphere of the penthouse. She didn't know where she was going. She had no plan, no destination. But as she walked away from the Croft Tower, its magnificent, spiraling form, a monument to a life she was leaving behind, she felt a sense of freedom, a sense of hope. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her reputation. But she still had the most important thing of all. She had her son, and she had herself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. She was no longer Mrs. Julian Croft, the discarded wife, the Black Widow. She was Isabella, a mother, a survivor, and her story, she knew, was far from over. 6 years. 6 years is a lifetime. It's long enough for a wound to scar over, for a memory to soften at the edges, for a new life to take root and blossom in the ashes of the old. In a small, sun-drenched town on the coast of California, a world away from the concrete canyons and the cutthroat ambition of New York City, Isabella had built that new life. She was no longer Isabella Croft, the tragic, vilified figure from the tabloid headlines. She was just Bella, the owner of a small but thriving bookstore called The Next Chapter. A haven of peace and stories nestled in the heart of the town. Her son Leo was the center of her universe. He was a bright, happy 6-year-old boy, with his father's startlingly blue eyes and her warm, infectious smile. He knew nothing of the Croft Empire, of the bitter, ugly war that had preceded his birth. His world was one of sunshine, scraped knees, and the endless magical stories that his mother read to him every night. Isabella had worked hard to create this life for them. She had started with nothing, just a few $100 and the fierce, unyielding love of a mother. She had worked odd jobs, saved every penny, and poured her heart and soul into her small bookstore. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was a life of peace, of contentment, of a hard-won, deeply cherished freedom. She rarely thought of Julian. The pain of his betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet, resigned sorrow for the man he had become. She had followed the news of his life from a distance in fleeting, morbidly curious glances at the headlines in the supermarket checkout line. He had eventually been released from the hospital, a shadow of his former self. He had won his divorce, his lawsuit, his Pyrrhic victory. He remained the head of Croft Enterprises, but the company was no longer the titan it had once been. Its reputation had been tarnished, its stock price had plummeted. The magic, it seemed, had gone out of the Croft name. Isabella had made peace with the past. She had forgiven Julian, not for his sake, but for hers. Forgiveness, she had learned, was the only way to truly be free. And then one sunny Tuesday afternoon, the past came walking through the door of her bookstore. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, that seemed out of place in the laid-back bohemian atmosphere of the town. He was older, his hair streaked with grey, his face lined with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. But there was no mistaking him. It was Marcus Thorne. Isabella's heart leaped into her throat. For a moment she was frozen, the book she had been shelving slipping from her nerveless fingers. Marcus's eyes scanned the cozy sunlit bookstore, then settled on her. There was no hostility in his gaze, no trace of the arrogant, ruthless man she had once known. There was only a profound, almost unbearable sadness. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Marcus?" she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here? I needed to see you," he said, taking a tentative step forward. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Leo, who had been playing quietly in a corner with a stack of picture books, looked up at the sound of the strange man's voice. He got to his feet and walked over to his mother, his small hand slipping into hers. Marcus's eyes fell on the boy, and a look of profound, heart-wrenching regret crossed his face. "He has his father's eyes," he said softly. "What do you want, Marcus?" Isabella asked, her voice stronger now, her protective instincts kicking in. "I've left the company," he said, his gaze returning to her. "I couldn't be a part of it anymore. Not after everything." He took a deep breath as if steeling himself for a painful confession. "What happened to Julian? The stroke. It wasn't karma, Isabella. It wasn't a random act of fate." Isabella stared at him, a cold dread creeping up her spine. "What are you talking about?" "There was a reason Julian was so paranoid, so obsessed with protecting his legacy," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He had a genetic condition, a congenital weakness in the blood vessels of his brain, an aneurysm. His father had it, his grandfather before him. It was a time bomb waiting to go off." Isabella's mind reeled. An aneurysm, a genetic condition. It was all a lie. The accusations of infidelity, the doubts about Leo's paternity, it was all a desperate, twisted attempt to push her away, to protect her from the inevitable. "He knew," she whispered, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a sickening thud. "He knew he was sick." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with a weary sorrow. He'd known for years. The doctors had warned him. They told him to avoid stress, to change his lifestyle. But he was Julian Croft. He thought he was invincible. He thought he could outrun his own DNA. "He didn't want you to be there when it happened." Marcus continued, his voice thick with a mixture of pity and guilt. "He didn't want you or the baby to be tied to a broken, dying man. He was trying to protect you in his own twisted, cruel way. He thought that if he made you hate him, it would be easier for you to leave, to build a new life." The bookstore, which had always been Isabella's sanctuary, suddenly felt like it was closing in on her. The truth, the terrible, devastating truth, was more cruel than any lie Julian could have invented. He hadn't been a monster. He had been a man in a cage, a man fighting a battle he knew he was destined to lose. And she had hated him for it. She had built a new life on the foundation of that hatred. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because he's dying, Isabella." Marcus said the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. The stroke was just the beginning. There have been others, smaller ones. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. A few months, maybe. And he's alone. He's pushed everyone away. He's sitting in that big, empty penthouse, a king in a kingdom of ghosts. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He's changed his will, he said, placing the envelope on the counter. He's leaving everything to you, and to his son. Isabella stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. I don't want his money, she said, her voice choked with a fresh wave of grief. It's not about the money, Isabella, Marcus said gently. It's about Leo. It's about his future. It's about giving him the legacy that Julian, in his own misguided way, was trying to protect. He looked at Leo, who was staring at him with a child's open, unnerving curiosity. He's a good boy, Isabella, he said, his voice cracking. He deserves to know his father. And his father. His father deserves to die in peace knowing that his son is taken care of. With that, Marcus turned and walked out of the bookstore, leaving Isabella alone with the ghost of her past and the heavy, burdensome weight of the future. That night, after she had put Leo to bed, Isabella sat in the quiet darkness of her living room, the unopened envelope lying on the table in front of her. She thought of Julian alone in his penthouse, a dying king in a gilded cage. She thought of the love they had once shared, a love that had been twisted and broken by fear and pride. And she knew with a certainty that went bone deep that she had to go back, not for the money, not for the legacy, but for the man who was the father of her child. She had to go back to give him the one thing that his money could not buy, forgiveness, and perhaps in the end to find a little of it for herself. She had to go back and write the final chapter of their story, a chapter not of bitterness and betrayal, but of compassion, of grace, of a love that was strong enough to transcend even the deepest of wounds. The next chapter of her life, she realized, was not here in this small, peaceful town. It was back in the city she had fled in the heart of the storm she had thought she had escaped. And this time, she would not be a victim. She would be a survivor, a queen returning to a fallen kingdom, not to reclaim a throne, but to heal a broken king. The story of Isabella and Julian is a harrowing journey of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of pride. It's a stark reminder that fortunes can be built on foundations of sand, and that the storms of life can wash away the most gilded of empires in the blink of an eye. But it's also a story of incredible resilience, of a woman who, stripped of everything, found a strength she never knew she possessed. It's a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love and the quiet, unshakable grace of forgiveness. What would you have done in Isabella's place? Would you have walked away forever? Or would you have returned to face the man who shattered your world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
A man at the pinnacle of wealth and power, a wife at home, carrying his child, and a glamorous mistress stealing the spotlight. But what happens when greed and betrayal collide at the very moment new life is meant to be celebrated? In a shocking twist that rocked high society circles, billionaire mogul Victor Harrington chose to whisk his mistress away on a secret baby moon, leaving his pregnant wife, Eleanor, behind. Little did he know that one impulsive decision would unravel a carefully built empire overnight. Brace yourself for a tale of lavish lifestyles, boardroom betrayals, and one pregnant woman's brilliant revenge. Victor Harrington was the kind of man who seemed destined for opulence from birth. Born into a wealthy family in Greenwich, Connecticut, he'd possessed an effortless charm and ambition that made him a force to be reckoned with even before he earned his MBA from Harvard Business School. People close to him said he was unstoppable, a man with the cunning of a Wall Street wolf and the charm of a Hollywood star. He had cut deals in the early days. Alongside mentors who boasted legendary names, he once studied an investment portfolio under Warren Buffett's guidance at a Berkshire Hathaway internship followed by an immersive executive program at Tesla University where he brushed shoulders with Elon Musk. By the time he was 30, he had built Harrington Industries into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. By the time he was 40, he was on the prestigious Forbes Billionaires list. Eleanor Davenport, soon to be Eleanor Harrington, first met Victor at a charity gala in Manhattan. Although her family was old money, they didn't flaunt it as visibly as the nouveau riche. She was a rising star in the philanthropic world, championing social justice causes, and her quiet grace drew Victor toward her like a magnet. The marriage was a match that made the front page of society magazines, promising to unite two powerful families in a union of wealth, influence, and mutual respect. For a long while, their life was the epitome of gilded harmony. They graced galas, inaugurated libraries, shook hands with political leaders, and jetted off to the French Riviera for impromptu vacations. Their future shone as bright as the diamond on Eleanor's left hand. But even the sturdiest empires can hide cracks. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, cracks were forming behind the scenes at Harrington Industries. Victor had an undeniable appetite for success, for excitement, and for women. When he met Bianca Suarez at a high-level conference in Dubai, it started as an innocent flirtation. She was an emerging media consultant, with her own brand of allure, mysterious, witty, and dangerously ambitious. If anyone had told Victor he was playing with fire, he would have laughed it off. After all, he was Victor Harrington, untouchable, unstoppable. But sometimes the most disastrous events start with just a spark. Over months, lunches turned into dinners, and dinners turned into clandestine weekends in exclusive resorts. Bianca introduced him to the kind of escapades he'd never even allowed himself to dream about before. While Eleanor was 3 months pregnant, carefully nurturing the next heir to the Harrington fortune, Victor found himself dancing intimately with his mistress under the shimmering skyline of Dubai, uncertain whether the rapid beating of his heart was excitement or guilt. Bianca didn't want to be a mere fling. She was calculated. She saw in Victor a chance to climb the social and financial ladder faster than any route she had previously considered. And so she stoked his ego, commiserated with his frustrations, and dangled the promise of secret passions whenever he seemed restless. If it was money and influence she wanted, Victor was more than willing to shower her with lavish gifts. To him, money was just a resource expendable and easily replenished. At first, he believed he could keep this double life separate from the pristine marriage he had built with Eleanor. His logic was twisted, but clear to him. His wife was his anchor, his old money confidant, who maintained his impeccable social standing. The mistress was a wild indulgence. He could afford a carefully contained adventure. He had no intention of hurting Eleanor, or so he told himself. Unfortunately for Victor, the threads keeping this secret under wraps were about to fray. A confidential tip circulated in the narrow corridors of Manhattan's wealthiest cliques. A society blogger posted an unconfirmed rumor about Victor seen dining with a mysterious brunette at a private suite in the Four Seasons Hotel. Most shrugged it off as an everyday hazard of being rich and famous. False rumors swirl constantly around the extremely wealthy. But there was more to this rumor than idle chatter. For the moment, Victor thought he had it all under control. He was a master juggler, wasn't he? Everything would remain neatly balanced, until it all came crashing down. As Eleanor's belly swelled with the promise of motherhood, her doctors advised a tranquil holiday to alleviate stress and welcome a sense of peace before the baby arrived. Friends whispered about the latest trend, a baby moon, a final romantic getaway for expecting couples. Eleanor secretly hoped Victor would take her somewhere calm, maybe a resort in the Maldives or a private villa in the Amalfi Coast. The dream of strolling white sandy beaches, holding Victor's hand, and relishing in the final moments of pregnancy, bliss danced in her mind. Victor, however, had a different plan entirely, a plan that was breathtakingly audacious and heartless. He decided to treat Bianca to a baby moon instead, using the ruse of an urgent business summit in Bali. For Victor, it was the ultimate indulgence, combine business with pleasure, while his wife rested at home, unaware that her husband was on the other side of the world, sipping cocktails by a turquoise infinity pool with another woman. He arranged it meticulously. He told Eleanor he was swamped with a high-stakes negotiation in Southeast Asia. Supposedly, several billionaire investors, including a silent partner, rumored to be connected with Bernard Arnault's luxury empire, had demanded an in-person meeting to finalize a partnership. The clock was ticking, he claimed. If he didn't fly out immediately, Harrington Industries risked missing a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Concerned and weary, Eleanor kissed him goodbye, placing her hand gently over her baby bump and whispering, "Please come home safe." Half a globe away, Victor's private jet landed under the scorching Balinese sun. Bianca, exuding confidence in a linen sundress and designer sunglasses, looked every bit the radiant vacationer. It was a world apart from Eleanor's subdued maternity style back in New York. They settled into an exclusive luxury resort, one that boasted private villas ensconced amid lush tropical forests and infinity pools that seemed to spill into the horizon. To Victor, the staff was discreet, the views unparalleled, and the exclusivity absolute, the perfect setting for a forbidden escapade. But even in paradise, there were signs that things could go wrong. Rumors had circulated that a well-known Hollywood actress was staying at the resort. The paparazzi lurking outside with long-lens cameras were determined to snag any sensational shot. Victor, in his arrogance, paid them no mind. He was too busy enjoying lavish seafood dinners, couples spa treatments, and romantic beachside strolls with Bianca. He reasoned that even if a photograph leaked, he had enough influence to squash it. Money talks, and hush money screams, as he liked to say. What he didn't anticipate was that a local journalist working part-time as a bartender recognized him immediately. The journalist, named Ayu Priyanka, was a savvy freelance reporter. She knew the difference between professional business summit behavior and lovers on a secret holiday. Intrigued, she discreetly snapped a few photographs with her phone, capturing Victor and Bianca laughing over a candle-lit dinner. At first, Ayu weighed the potential consequences. Could these pictures be valuable enough to lead to a groundbreaking story in an international tabloid? Possibly. But first, she needed more solid proof, a narrative that went beyond just two people enjoying a vacation. While Victor reveled in the illusions of a perfect getaway, Eleanor was left to manage her pregnancy in New York, dealing with morning sickness doctor's appointments, and the creeping suspicion that her husband's voice over the phone sounded distant, disconnected. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the vaulted ceiling of their penthouse, feeling a cold emptiness in their once warm bed. Something was terribly off, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Her mother, Cecilia Davenport, urged her to rest and trust in Victor's dedication to their growing family. After all, he was a busy billionaire. He had always been a bit distant when major deals were on the line. The seeds of betrayal had been planted. If Victor had known the destructive potential of this trip, he might have turned the jet around before it even left the tarmac in New York. But he was blinded by Bianca's enchantments and his own audacity. Each day in Bali heightened his recklessness. He even posted a cryptic Instagram photo of palm trees and a hidden silhouette, an attempt at being clever. Inadvertently, that single post gave watchers enough clues to confirm his exact location. The stage was set for a grand reveal. The baby moon that should have belonged to Eleanor was turning into a ticking time bomb. Sooner or later, a photo or rumor would slip through the cracks, and the moment it did, it would detonate not just Victor's marriage, but potentially the entire foundation of Harrington Industries. In the days following Victor's departure, Eleanor tried to distract herself with philanthropic work. She immersed herself in a high-profile hospital fundraiser hosted at the New York Public Library, the same halls once graced by the likes of Michael Bloomberg and philanthropic luminaries from across the nation. Yet even as she stood at the podium, acknowledging donations and delivering heartfelt speeches, an unsettling feeling gnawed at her. It was during one of these fundraisers that Eleanor bumped into her old friend, Serena Marshall, a well-connected socialite and gossip connoisseur. They embraced warmly, then retreated to a corner table where Serena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ellie, dear, have you heard anything odd about Victor lately?" Eleanor bristled at the tone, feeling a pang of unease. She mustered a soft laugh, trying to brush off any concerns. "Funny you should ask," Eleanor replied. "He's in Bali, urgent business. Hasn't been easy on me, but you know how these deals are." Serena looked at her sympathetically, but her eyes flashed with alarm. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice further. "I heard something from a contact in Singapore. Someone said they saw Victor with a woman named Bianca Suarez, apparently a rising star in media consulting. And they weren't exactly at a boardroom table." Eleanor's heart lurched. She struggled to maintain her composure, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be a misunderstanding? A smear attempt by a competitor? She had known Victor for years, had believed in his loyalty, though she was aware of his love for excitement. She forced a polite smile, dismissing the rumors. "I'm sure it's some confusion. You know how gossip can get twisted." Serena nodded, but the shadow in her eyes spoke volumes. "Just keep your eyes open, Ellie. If you need help, you know where to find me." That night, alone in her penthouse, Eleanor found her thoughts spiraling. She recalled the nights Victor had come home, late, the hush-hush phone calls, the vague business dinners. She scrolled through social media, scanning for clues, anything to confirm or debunk the rumors. Eventually, she stumbled upon Victor's cryptic Instagram post, palm trees in the background, a silhouette that looked suspiciously feminine. A flood of emotions overtook her. She ran to the bathroom, tears mixing with waves of nausea from her pregnancy. The baby felt her turmoil kicking inside her womb, a reminder of why she had to maintain her composure. Meanwhile, half a world away, Victor's lavish romance continued unabated. He lounged with Bianca in a cabana overlooking the ocean. They talked about launching new philanthropic initiatives, ironically enough, under Bianca's name, funded by Victor's bottomless resources. Bianca was adept at shaping narratives guiding Victor's public image. "Picture this," she said, leaning forward with sparkling eyes. "We frame you as a forward-thinking businessman who invests in youth-oriented media projects across Asia. You'll expand your market reach and look good doing it. I can even help you with the contacts and PR." Victor, enthralled, listened intently. He considered Bianca not just a lover, but a strategic mind who understood branding in a way that could amplify Harrington Industries' global presence. In his mind, he was weaving a dream, a future where he could maintain a public marriage with Eleanor, keep control of his empire, and quietly enjoy a partnership with Bianca that would catapult them both to unprecedented heights. But the cracks in that dream were starting to show. On the third day of their business trip, Victor received a text from one of his board members, Jackson Wolfe, an old friend who had initially introduced him to some of his earliest investors. The text was direct: "Call me. Urgent. Concern about rumors." Victor paled as he read the message. Could it be? But he shrugged it off. Board members worry about everything from stock fluctuation to media gossip. Still, the knot in his stomach tightened. Jackson, however, knew something that Victor didn't news was spreading in hush-hush financial circles, that the Harrington brand was vulnerable. Pioneering investors disliked uncertainty. If the rumors of Victor's scandal went public, it could undermine negotiations, spook shareholders, and create chaos. Handle it before it blows up, Jackson's text concluded. Yet even that warning didn't shake Victor enough to abandon his tryst. He rationalized that he would handle the fallout once he returned to New York. He was Victor Harrington, after all, a man who had charmed senators out, negotiated cunning tycoons, and turned entire markets on their heads with a single announcement. A rumor or two wouldn't bring him down. Across the ocean, Eleanor was wrestling with growing doubts. She paced the penthouse, replaying every suspicious detail of the past months. Could Victor really be that brazen to take another woman on the very trip meant for them? She didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was mounting. She decided to call an old college acquaintance, Damien Cho, a private investigator who specialized in high-profile cases. "Damien," she began, her voice trembling, I need you to look into something." Discreetly. Eleanor's resolution to seek the truth was the first step toward unraveling Victor's carefully woven tapestry of lies. But it wouldn't stop there. Even she didn't realize yet that once she discovered what was truly happening, her response would be nothing short of a coup, one that would leave Victor's empire trembling at her feet. Damien Cho worked fast. He was an expert in navigating the hidden underbelly of high society scandals. Having once been hired to investigate the suspicious affairs of an actual European prince, this job was par for the course, but it carried a personal element. He knew Eleanor from her days volunteering at a local community center. He respected her warmth, her dedication. And so, when Eleanor asked for his help, he pledged to handle the matter personally. He first followed the breadcrumbs online, examining social media check-ins, cross-referencing flight logs from Teterboro Airport, where Victor often chartered private jets, combing through paparazzi shots of Indonesian resorts. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Damien discreetly messaged contacts in Bali, among them a local stringer for an American tabloid, who confirmed that a wealthy American named Victor Harrington had been spotted with a woman who was decidedly not pregnant. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, Damien's chest tightened with an uneasy sense of foreboding. This wasn't just a case of a random affair. The stakes were colossal. The Harrington name carried weight in corporate boardrooms across the globe, and any scandal could rock markets and ripple through philanthropic circles. The next step was deciding how to deliver the news to Eleanor without breaking her heart entirely. Meanwhile, Eleanor found daily life increasingly difficult. She attended obstetric appointments alone, feigning a smile when the doctor asked about Victor's whereabouts. Her mother noticed the change in her demeanor. "Ellie, darling, you look so tired. Is everything all right?" Eleanor shook her head, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I just need some rest, Mum. I'll be okay." But the moment Cecilia left, Eleanor gave in to sobs, tears that combined heartbreak with a fierce determination. She had a baby to protect, and she would not allow uncertainty to linger. When Damien finally presented his findings, documented photos, flight logs, even a snippet of a conversation recorded by a local resort worker, Eleanor felt both devastation and a strange, cold clarity. She stared at the evidence in stony silence. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had chosen to spend precious days in paradise with another woman, parading their affair so openly that it had already begun to leak in social circles. But heartbreak wasn't the only emotion coursing through Eleanor. A sense of betrayal so profound that it threatened to consume her was tempered by the resilience her family had instilled in her. The Davenport lineage was filled with strong, sharp-witted individuals, some who had weathered financial crises, others who had surmounted personal tragedies. Eleanor carried that legacy in her veins. If Victor wanted to toy with her trust, she would answer in a way that made him regret underestimating her. She quietly called her personal attorney, Simone Gold, a formidable woman with an impeccable track record in corporate law. Simone, Eleanor said softly, "I need to talk about my shares in Harrington Industries and what I might do with them if circumstances change." That phone call set off a chain of events that would reshape the corporate landscape of Harrington Industries. In an ironclad prenuptial agreement, a document Victor insisted on, there was a clause that ironically granted Eleanor a significant stake in the company if Victor ever breached certain moral turpitude conditions. At the time, neither had expected it to be relevant. After all, it was standard protective language in high society marriages to discourage reckless behavior. Now that clause became Eleanor's key to a possible coup. Late one evening, Eleanor sat with Simone in a private library. The scene was fit for a secret conspiracy. Thick velvet drapes, mahogany tables, the faint glow of a Tiffany lamp, illuminating piles of legal documents. "We have everything we need if you choose to proceed," Simone stated calmly. "You can call for a vote of no confidence, leveraging your shares, and then move to replace Victor as CEO if you prove a serious breach of conduct that jeopardizes the company." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. He's not just a cheating husband. He's risking the company's reputation. Investors talk. Stocks drop at the mere hint of scandal. The board might push him out to save their own skins. "I just never thought I'd be the one orchestrating this." Simone placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's. "From my experience, betrayal often forces us into decisions we never thought we'd make. But the best decisions are those made from strength, not spite." Meanwhile, across the world, Victor was blissfully unaware of the legal storm brewing in New York. His only concern was how to spin the rumors swirling around the resort. Bianca, too, was confident. Over dinner one night, she reassured him. "We can craft a PR statement that says you were networking with me for a series of upcoming deals in Southeast Asia. Bring up philanthropic collaborations in local communities, nobody will suspect a thing." Victor nodded in agreement, grateful for her cunning. It never crossed his mind that back home a pregnant Eleanor was on the brink of executing a swift and devastating plan. Simone's phone calls to board members had already begun under the guise of friendly check-ins. She was gathering allies, stoking concerns about Victor's reliability. The board, always protective of its bottom line, listened closely. After all, a scandal at the top could mean bad press, falling stock, or worse. Piece by piece, Eleanor's revolt was forming. She was no longer the timid, heartbroken wife. She was a future mother who refused to let her child inherit the aftermath of a father's betrayal. If Victor wasn't going to be a responsible partner, she would ensure he couldn't take the company down with him. In less than a week, the stage would be set for an explosive board meeting, one that would pit Eleanor's quiet determination against Victor's flamboyant arrogance. Victor returned to New York in a flurry of self-assured triumph, convinced that he had contained any rumors about his secret affair with Bianca. He strolled into his penthouse, expecting to find Eleanor in a subdued but loving mood. Instead, the apartment was cool-hushed. Even the staff seemed unusually tense. Eleanor was sitting in the living room, sipping tea, her eyes distant. The subtle tension in the air pricked at Victor's confidence, but he masked it with a charming grin. "Darling, I'm home," he announced, setting down his luggage. He reached out to kiss her cheek, but she recoiled, her expression revealing the silent storm within. "Where were you, really?" she asked softly, the tremble in her voice betraying her hurt. For a moment, Victor froze his mind, whirling with excuses. "I told you," he began, forcing composure negotiations in Bali. "It was stressful, but—" Stressful, Eleanor interrupted. Her voice rose slightly. "Look at me, Victor." She stood, revealing her swollen belly. "I'm the one who's pregnant with your child alone, while you were off entertaining your mistress." Her words reverberated in the elegant living room, echoing amid the hush of the staff. Victor's eyes flickered with panic. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, we shouldn't do this in front of—" She cut him off again, the tears in her eyes reflecting both pain and fury. "We shouldn't do this at all, but you left me no choice." With trembling hands, she gathered her coat and purse. "I'll be at my mother's. My attorney will be in touch." Victor felt the world tilt beneath him. "Eleanor, wait. We can talk this through." "You know I'd never—" "I know everything," she hissed, her voice cold as steel. With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, accompanied by 2 discreet bodyguards her mother had insisted she employ. The slamming door reverberated, leaving Victor in a stunned silence that belied the magnitude of the unfolding crisis. The next few days passed in a blur of chaos for Victor. He frantically texted and called Eleanor, but her responses were minimal formal. She refused to meet alone. Then came the calls from the Harrington Industries board members. A special board meeting had been scheduled for the following week. The stated reason: urgent discussions regarding leadership and corporate strategy. The tone of the calls made Victor's stomach drop. There was no cordial small talk, no easy banter. These were men and women who smelled blood in the water. Desperate, Victor reached out to Bianca for comfort. But even she sensed the shifting currents. "We need a plan," she told him, her face pale with concern, during a hushed dinner in a secluded Michelin star restaurant. "You have to get ahead of this. Frame your trip as purely business. Remind them how indispensable you are. Show them your next big project is about to roll out." She offered him PR angles, preparing to rally her media contacts. Yet even Bianca's cunning felt insufficient against the tidal wave Eleanor had set in motion. Behind closed doors, Simone Gold was meeting with Harrington board members, presenting them evidence of Victor's risky behavior and how it jeopardized the company's reputation and future prospects. She skillfully outlined the moral turpitude clause and how it could be invoked to remove him. Meanwhile, Eleanor, hidden away at her mother's estate, tried to steady her emotions and maintain her health for the baby. She found solace in daily visits to her favorite greenhouse on the property, letting the scent of fresh blooms and the vibrancy of life remind her why she was fighting this battle so fiercely. Perhaps the most decisive ally Eleanor gained was Jackson Wolfe, the board member who'd been Victor's close friend. As the scandal threatened to burst into public view, Jackson too found himself cornered by anxious stakeholders and even the press. He'd always admired Victor's brilliance, but he couldn't deny the volatility that was now overshadowing the CEO's leadership. When Eleanor approached him with a personal appeal, asking him to place the company's welfare first, Jackson felt the weight of responsibility. After all, an empire like Harrington Industries didn't revolve around just one man. It had thousands of employees, global partners, and philanthropic obligations. A meltdown at the top could hurt them all. The tension escalated as tabloids began printing speculative articles about Victor's affair. Photos from Bali surfaced online, showing a man who looked suspiciously like Victor Harrington in an intimate embrace with a mystery woman. An onlooker claimed they overheard staff whispering Bianca's name. While some media outlets remained cautious, calling the pictures inconclusive, the digital sphere teemed with rumors. Social media users shared side-by-side comparisons of the man in Bali with official photos of Victor. The avalanche had begun. In an emergency PR move, Victor released a statement through Harrington Industries claiming he had been inspecting potential sites for philanthropic work and that Ms. Bianca Suarez was a consultant assisting in negotiations with local community leaders. The statement was riddled with corporate jargon, and critics pounced on it as an evasive half-truth. The board meeting date approached ominously. Investors whispered about the potential for a shift in leadership. Analysts on financial channels debated the seriousness of the scandal's impact. Share prices wavered slightly, but enough to create nervous chatter. All the while, Victor felt increasingly trapped, his once indomitable confidence shaken to the core. Somewhere behind the scenes, Eleanor steeled herself. She placed a hand on her baby bump, remembering why she needed to see this through. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about securing a future for her child, free from the looming shadow of a father who believed he could treat people as pawns in his personal game. She wanted to protect the legacy that her baby would one day inherit, ensuring it wasn't poisoned by Victor's self-serving choices. When the morning of the board meeting finally arrived, Manhattan buzzed with anticipation. Black SUVs lined up outside Harrington Tower. News vans prowled the streets, hoping for a glimpse of either Victor or Eleanor. Inside the building's executive conference room, the fate of one of the city's most powerful men hung in the balance. And unbeknownst to Victor, Eleanor had spent countless hours meticulously preparing for this moment. On an unseasonably cold spring morning, the towering glass facade of Harrington Tower reflected a bleak, steel-gray sky. Inside the executive conference room on the 59th floor, a series of tense discussions filled the air. Board members took their seats around a polished mahogany table. At the head sat an imposing leather chair reserved for the CEO, a seat that Victor Harrington assumed was unequivocally his. But as the clock neared 9 a.m., the tension in the room crackled with electric intensity. Victor entered shoulders-squared hair, meticulously styled, wearing a custom-tailored suit. He exuded the aura of a man used to control, but a subtle flicker in his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Next to him walked Bianca, meticulously groomed in a business outfit, ready to spin narratives. Her presence alone raised eyebrows. Traditionally, only top executives or board-invited advisors attended these pivotal meetings. Bianca, however, was neither. Whispers erupted as board members exchanged curious looks. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors swung open again. Eleanor stepped inside, supported by her attorney, Simone Gold. Wearing a subdued black dress that discreetly draped her pregnant figure, she moved with quiet, composed determination. A hush fell over the room. Heads turned, and even Victor's practiced poise faltered for an instant. This was the first time he'd seen his wife since she had walked out of the penthouse. She acknowledged the board members with a polite nod, her gaze not lingering too long on Victor. No one missed the significance of her presence, especially because she was still a major shareholder with seats on the board that her Davenport family connections had secured. Simone took a seat beside Eleanor, placing a leather briefcase on the table, the metal clasps glinting under fluorescent lights. The board chair, an elderly statesman, named Arthur Norwood cleared his throat. Thank you all for attending this extraordinary session. We have urgent matters to discuss regarding Harrington Industries' leadership vision and recent developments in the public sphere. His gaze darted from Victor to Eleanor and back again. This is a confidential meeting, so I expect the utmost discretion. Victor tried to seize the initiative. Standing, he projected his confident, booming voice. Before we begin, let me address the swirling rumors. There have been malicious reports in the press about my personal life. I want to assure everyone here that these allegations are blown out of proportion. My trip to Bali was primarily for philanthropic site inspections and negotiations with prospective investors. He gestured toward Bianca. Ms. Suarez has been an instrumental media consultant, helping me navigate international expansions and philanthropic strategies. Bianca stepped forward, her tone crisp and professional. I understand the concerns, but I assure you, my partnership with Mr. Harrington is strictly business. We've been discussing a large-scale youth media initiative. Eleanor, calm, yet resolute, interrupted. That's enough. She rose slowly, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Her voice was steady, resonant with an inner strength. We're all aware of the photographic evidence. We know the media stories aren't mere fabrications, but the real issue here isn't just a personal indiscretion. It's the risk posed to this company, our company, by this scandal. She glanced around the table, meeting each board member's gaze. I have proof of how negotiations with certain Asian partners have been compromised by the negative press. Investor confidence is wavering. And this is on top of the moral turpitude clause in Victor's contract. A stunned silence followed. Moral turpitude clauses were rarely mentioned in corporate contexts, but in high-profile marriages that intersected with business holdings, they were sometimes used to protect the company from the detrimental actions of a key figure. Victor's face paled momentarily. He cast a sharp look at Simone, recalling the prenuptial agreement's fine print that he once dismissed as boilerplate. She returned his stare with icy composure. Arthur Norwood cleared his throat again. Mrs. Harrington, can you elaborate on the severity of these repercussions? Simone clicked open her briefcase and pulled out neatly organized documents. Board members here, you'll find data illustrating recent dips in stock value following the Bali scandal leaks. This is paired with the explicit language in the moral turpitude clause that Mr. Harrington personally signed. If certain actions, infidelity, damaging public scandals, put the company at risk, shareholders have the right to demand a revaluation of leadership. Victor jumped to his feet, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. This is outrageous. You're using our personal issues to stage a corporate coup. You can't do this. Jackson Wolfe spoke up, surprising Victor with the quiet resolve in his voice. Victor, your name may be on the building, but you're not the sole owner. We all have to safeguard Harrington Industries. The press is already circling. If we lose key investors because of your personal mistakes, thousands of jobs could be at risk, not to mention our philanthropic commitments. He paused, avoiding Victor's gaze. I'm sorry, old friend, but business is business. The tension reached a fever pitch as a motion was placed on the table. Eleanor, supported by her block of shares and quietly backed by the Davenport family's significant influence, made a formal request for a vote of no confidence in Victor Harrington as CEO. Typically, such measures took weeks to arrange. But the moral turpitude clause, combined with the urgent crisis, allowed an immediate consideration. It was unprecedented, but legal. Victor and Bianca watched in mounting horror as the votes were cast. Old alliances turned shaky. Some board members, who once owed their positions to Victor, now weighed their own survival. The result wasn't even close. A majority sided with Eleanor and Simone's proposal. The motion carried, effectively ousting Victor from the CEO position pending further negotiations regarding his stake and role in the company. Eleanor looked across the table, her eyes moist with a blend of triumph and heartbreak. "Victor, I never wanted it to come to this," she said quietly, "but you forced my hand." Stunned into silence, Victor sank into his chair. Bianca tried to speak, to offer a rebuttal or spin, but her words faltered in the face of the board's overwhelming consensus. The meeting concluded with a swirl of legal procedures. A caretaker CEO would be appointed, with an emergency leadership council to manage day-to-day operations, while a permanent replacement was sought. For all intents and purposes, Victor's reign was over. As people gathered their folders and prepared to leave, an ominous hush filled the room. The downfall of a once mighty empire head had played out in a mere hour. Eleanor, gathering her strength, exited without another word, Simone at her side. In the hallway, the press buzzed, cameras flashing. But Eleanor walked past them, a silent force of composure, stepping into a waiting car that whisked her away. Inside that car, she finally allowed herself to exhale. She gently placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's light kick. A swirl of conflicting emotions flooded her: sorrow, relief, fury, and the faint hope that maybe now the child she carried could one day grow into a legacy untainted by reckless betrayal. Victor had taken a mistress on a baby moon that should have been theirs, but in that betrayal, he had also handed Eleanor the keys to the kingdom. The world of high finance reacted swiftly to the seismic shift at Harrington Industries. Within hours, the news had spread from private trading floors in Hong Kong to business lunches in London. Major outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times dedicated front-page headlines to Victor Harrington's sudden ouster, speculating on the behind-the-scenes drama that led to it. Business analysts on CNBC questioned whether Harrington Industries could maintain its momentum without the larger-than-life charisma of its founder. But in hushed corners of society events and exclusive clubs, the whispers focused on the scandal's personal dimension. Everyone knew that Victor had been unseated, not just by the board, but by the very wife he betrayed while she was pregnant with his child. The story was salacious enough to feed tabloids for weeks, but it also showcased Eleanor's business acumen and unyielding resolve. Where once people saw her as simply Victor's gracious spouse, they now recognized a formidable woman who had deftly used a moral turpitude clause to protect herself and the company. Victor retreated to a penthouse suite at the Carlisle Hotel, a discreet refuge for the city's affluent seeking privacy amid turmoil. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from attorneys, PR managers, and concerned allies. But not all calls were sympathetic. Some were angry investors demanding explanations, and others were from tabloids offering extravagant sums for exclusive interviews. Victor ignored most of them, drowning his sorrows in half-empty whiskey glasses. Bianca hovered around him, attempting to console him. Yet her once firm confidence now wavered as she faced the repercussions of being publicly named as the mistress. Gossip columns buzzed with her name, some labeling her a gold digger who had orchestrated the entire fiasco to boost her media profile. Even legitimate media platforms questioned her credentials, doubting her role as a bona fide consultant. The brand she'd painstakingly built threatened to crumble, and the high-profile connections she once courted grew wary of associating with scandal. She tried to assure Victor that they still had each other, and that it was only a matter of time before they bounced back. But in the pit of his despair, her words rang hollow. Meanwhile, behind the imposing walls of the Davenport estate, Eleanor found herself grappling with mixed emotions. She had succeeded in removing Victor from the company leadership, but the personal cost weighed heavily on her. She was married to a man whose betrayal had shattered her trust. For nights on end, she lay awake, feeling the baby's gentle movements and wondering what kind of future they would have. She consulted with Simone about legal separation, maybe even divorce, but each time she hesitated, mindful of the unborn child who would inevitably link her life to Victor's in some way. While Eleanor wrestled with internal conflicts, corporate maneuvers continued at Harrington Industries. The newly appointed caretaker CEO, Lawrence Porter, a veteran executive from within the company, diligently tried to stabilize investor sentiment. He reached out to longtime partners, reminding them of the company's resilient fundamentals and diversified portfolio. But the stock still dipped further, reflecting the market's anxiety. Even seasoned analysts couldn't discount the intangible influence Victor once held. Lawrence, however, had Eleanor's backing, and Jackson Wolfe's strategic insight. Their combined efforts formed a temporary shield against a total collapse in confidence. In an attempt to turn the tide, Simone advised Eleanor to take a more visible role. "You don't have to be CEO, but your presence will reassure investors," she said gently. "Host a small event. Show your commitment to the company. Let them see that the Harrington brand is intact, anchored by someone with integrity." Eleanor was reluctant, but she recognized the necessity. Against her natural inclination for privacy, she agreed to hold a press conference to address the company's future. Titled "A New Horizon for Harrington Industries," it was carefully orchestrated, tasteful floral arrangements, minimal fanfare, and a succinct message of stability, progress, and renewed commitment to philanthropy. Eleanor spoke for only 10 minutes, but her measured tone and composed demeanor impressed even the cynics. She reiterated the strength of the firm's core businesses and announced a series of philanthropic initiatives focusing on maternal health, an unsubtle nod to her own journey. By the end, the stock saw a modest uptick, a sign that perhaps the market believed Harrington Industries could weather the storm after all. Yet beneath the public facade of a carefully managed transition lay personal entanglements that were far from resolved. Victor watched Eleanor's press conference in his hotel suite, a feeling of muted awe stirring inside him. There she was, the woman he had wronged gracefully, commanding respect from an audience of seasoned journalists and business leaders. He couldn't help but feel a pang of regret, if not for his actions, then for his hubris that had led him here. One evening, as he swirled whiskey in a crystal tumbler, he found his thoughts drifting uncomfortably to the future. Would Eleanor proceed with a divorce? What about the baby? Would he have a place in his child's life? After everything that happened, he knew he had to attempt to fix things, at least in part. Taking a deep breath, he dialed Eleanor's number for the first time since the board meeting. The phone rang and rang until her voicemail picked up. Victor hesitated, then left a quiet message. "Eleanor, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but we need to talk about everything, especially the baby. I'm sorry." He wasn't sure if he expected a reply, but he knew there was no easy path forward without at least confronting the reality of the child they both were responsible for. Outside the Carlyle's windows, the city glistened under a canopy of lights. For the first time in years, Victor Harrington, once the master of the universe, felt entirely unsure of what lay ahead. A week after the historic boardroom coup, Eleanor sat in her mother's sunlit conservatory. Hothouse orchids of every hue framed the glass walls, their vibrant blossoms reminding her that life continued to flourish even in the face of strife. She absent-mindedly rubbed her baby bump, reflecting on the swirl of events that had consumed her life. She was no longer just a wife. She was a major shareholder who had pulled the strings to unseat a billionaire mogul. Yet behind the newfound respect people afforded her lay an ache of betrayal that no corporate victory could mend. Her phone buzzed. Checking it, she found a message from Victor. Please, let's talk. We owe it to ourselves and our child. Eleanor stared at the words, her heart pounding. After everything that had happened, could she face him? But she also knew that ignoring him forever wasn't an option. They had a child to consider, a future that demanded clarity, if not reconciliation. She typed a brief reply, "Tomorrow noon, the Davenport estate. Bring your attorney." It was a formal invitation, suggesting a calm, structured environment. If they were to negotiate the boundaries of their future, the setting would be one Eleanor controlled. Victor arrived the next day wearing a subdued suit that lacked his usual flashiness. Accompanying him was his personal lawyer, a soft-spoken man who looked uncomfortable from the moment they stepped onto the immaculately trimmed lawns. Eleanor greeted them in the estate's library, flanked by Simone Gold. Polite nods were exchanged, but the tension was palpable. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," Victor began, clearing his throat. His voice was subdued, none of the brash confidence that once defined him. "I know I've caused you unbelievable pain, and I'm truly sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to ensure that I'm still part of our child's life." Eleanor studied him, trying to reconcile the man she'd once loved with the broken figure before her. "You made a choice, Victor. More than one choice, over and over, to lie to me. You destroyed the trust we had. But yes, you're still the father of this child." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I won't deny you the chance to be in our baby's life if you can prove you'll be a responsible parent." Simone nudged a folder across the polished table. "We have some proposed terms," she explained. "For co-parenting, child support, and possibly spousal support, should Eleanor decide to file for divorce. It's all preliminary, but it provides a framework." Victor shot a quick glance at his attorney, who nodded as he skimmed the documents. Before he could respond, Eleanor raised a hand. "But let's be clear. I expect honesty from here on out. Any more deceptions, financial or personal, and you'll lose access. Is that understood?" Swallowing hard, Victor nodded. "I understand." They navigated the intricacies of child support and visitation schedules with the same formality one would use to negotiate a business deal. Simone outlined how they'd handle expenses related to education, healthcare, and even a trust fund for the child's future. Despite the emotional undercurrent, the conversation remained measured, proving that both parties were resolute in doing what was best for the baby. Outside, the day had turned overcast, clouds gathering like silent witnesses to this fateful meeting. When all the legal points had been addressed, an uneasy silence fell. Victor turned to Eleanor, voice trembling with something akin to remorse. "I know a contract can't fix this, but maybe with time." Eleanor's expression was soft, yet cautious. "I don't know if we can rebuild trust, Victor. Right now, my focus is on our child and on stabilizing Harrington Industries. I won't forgive what you did, at least not yet. But for the baby's sake, I'm willing to keep the door to communication open." Victor sighed, relief and sorrow mingling in his eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After they finished, Simone escorted Victor and his lawyer to the door. Eleanor stayed behind, still seated at the heavy wooden table. The moment the door clicked shut, she buried her face in her hands, a quiet sob breaking through the composure she'd clung to all afternoon. The meeting felt like the formal dissolution of the life she once cherished and the birth of a tentative new arrangement dictated by lawyers and heartbreak. Outside, Victor paused under the estate's grand archway, looking back at the stately manor. He felt an immense sense of loss, of Eleanor, of the carefree world he once believed was his by right. All that remained was the flicker of hope that he might still salvage some shred of dignity or at least fatherhood from the wreckage. As the sun began to set, both of them were left contemplating the precarious path ahead. For Eleanor, there was the daunting task of balancing her new role in the company impending motherhood and the emotional toll of Victor's betrayal. For Victor, a future unspooled that no longer revolved around his unchecked desires. The affair with Bianca had scorched the once verdant life he enjoyed, leaving him to rebuild on whatever scorched earth remained. And standing at the epicenter of it all was a child not yet born, but already shaping the decisions and destinies of the two people who had brought them into this world. 2 months after the boardroom coup, Harrington Industries began to steady under interim CEO Lawrence Porter and Eleanor's quiet but guiding influence. Investor confidence, once shaken, showed signs of recovery. Eleanor, though not officially at the helm, became the moral compass the company sorely needed. Her focus shifted toward green energy in Southeast Asia and philanthropic programs in education and maternal health causes that echoed her personal transformation. While the board rallied behind her strategic insights, Eleanor embraced the final stages of pregnancy in the comfort of the Davenport estate. She and her mother Cecilia carefully prepared the nursery. The estate, adorned with family portraits and fresh blooms, became a sanctuary of reflection and resolve. Eleanor found a strange comfort in her new dual identity, mother-to-be and corporate architect. Victor, meanwhile, lived in quiet exile at the Carlisle Hotel, a far cry from the boardroom he once ruled. He made half-hearted attempts to salvage his image, TV interviews, vague apologies, even an anonymous donation to one of Eleanor's maternal health projects. But the public had moved on. Bianca Suarez had all but disappeared, reportedly in Europe, rebranding her image. Their affair, once blazing with scandal, faded into footnotes in tabloids. Victor's fall was complete. His public charm now rang hollow in empty rooms. Despite all, he still hoped to be part of his unborn child's life. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, he left Eleanor a voicemail. "We need to talk. About the baby, I'm sorry." When Eleanor heard the message, she hesitated, but she knew this conversation was inevitable. Her reply was short and firm. "Tomorrow, noon. Here, bring your attorney." The next day, Victor arrived at the Davenport estate, subdued, accompanied by a lawyer who looked as uncomfortable as the situation warranted. In the library, Simone Gold stood by Eleanor's side, and together they laid out terms, co-parenting, financial responsibilities, and strict boundaries. "I won't deny you access," Eleanor said, her tone even. "But if there's any dishonesty, any more games, you'll lose that right." Victor nodded solemnly. "I understand." They negotiated like business partners rather than former lovers. Once the legal matters were handled, an awkward silence lingered. "Maybe," Victor said, voice low with time. "I'm not ready to talk about forgiveness," Eleanor replied, "but for our child's sake, I'll keep the door open." Weeks later, as autumn deepened, Eleanor went into labor earlier than expected. In the pre-dawn hours, amidst the sterile light of a hospital room, she gave birth to a baby boy. Tears filled her eyes as she held him. "Welcome to the world," she whispered. her voice breaking. Victor arrived hours later. She could have turned him away, but didn't. He entered quietly, awestruck by the sight of their son. "He's perfect," he murmured, his hands trembling as he cradled the child. Eleanor watched, uncertain but composed. Despite everything, their son deserved a future rooted in peace, not bitterness. That moment of shared awe, the only one since their world, fractured, offered a flicker of fragile possibility. The scandal had toppled a billionaire, empowered a betrayed woman, and birthed a new legacy. In this dawn-lit hospital room, the next chapter was just beginning. Thank you for joining me on this tumultuous journey of passion, power, and redemption. From a secret Bali getaway that sparked rumors in the tabloids to a dramatic boardroom coup that shook Harrington Industries, we've witnessed how betrayal and ambition can unravel even the mightiest of empires. Yet in the end, we've also seen how strength, dignity, and a fierce sense of purpose can guide us through the darkest storms. Eleanor emerged not just as a scorned wife, but as a formidable force, one who safeguarded an entire company while preparing to welcome new life into the world.